Well, our special guest on Left, Right and Centre tonight is Professor Sugata Bose, who is out with his latest book, The Nation as Mother and Other Visions of Nationhood, a book that is particularly relevant as India turns 70 on the 15th of August next week. And in this book, through a number of essays and speeches that Professor Bose himself has also made, he explores the relationship between the nation, between reason and religion in Indian political thought and practice. And we're happy to have Professor Bose joining us on the program this evening. Your book is very timely because at this time we're talking so much about nationalism and what it means to be nationalist in India today. Tell us why this book is different and the context that it provides to this contemporary debate.
I try to provide a critique of the narrow, selfish and arrogant nationalism that is being propagated today by the powers that be. I want, as a historian, to take a look back at what were the ingredients of anti-colonial nationalism in the early decades of the 20th century. And by exploring the history of political and economic ideas in the decades leading up to independence, I find that, in fact, there were healthy debates about nationalism. I start with Tagore. It is the 100th anniversary of the publication of his book, Nationalism. And he was a fascinating figure who wrote patriotic songs and poems on the one hand, but also had a very critical perspective on territorial nationalism of the European kind. In fact,
he always struck a note of caution on that, didn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, he placed humanity above the nation. If you read Nationalism, he has sentences like, nationalism is a menace.
Yeah.
He thought nationalism was one of the most powerful anesthetics invented by man. And yet, he was patriotic. He was critical of British colonial rule. He said in the same book that the British report street accidents in London with pathos, but will not talk about calamities in India. He was also very prescient. He actually said in that book towards the end that we have social restrictions. We are so intolerant about food preferences. And he thought that this might continue in our political organization at some time in the future, create engines of coercion that would snuff out the expression of any rational difference, which he thought was the sign of life. And so I really wanted to suggest that the most enlightened of our nationalist thinkers and leaders was self-critical about nationalism.
Which is completely missing today.
Which is completely missing today.
It's a more muscular kind of propagation of nationalism, isn't it, today? Where, you know, for instance, you have a vice-chancellor talking about putting a tank on campus. What did you think of that?
I thought it was a very puerile idea, that one must have a military symbol to somehow, you know, instill feelings of nationalism in our youth. Yes, at one level, we are seeing the propagation of what you're describing as a muscular nationalism or a militarized nationalism. We have to be uncritical about our armed forces and the way we deploy them even inside our own country. At another level, of course, it is a nationalism that is based on religious majoritarianism. And the history of nationalism and nationalist thought that I have explored suggests that the best of our political thinkers and leaders were in fact wanting to reflect the diversity of our country. They refused to think in terms of majority and minority based on religious enumeration. They were thinking in terms of cultural intimacy among different communities. So it is that alternative sense of nationhood and a nationalism which inspires a spirit of service in our people, that instills creative faculties in our people. That's the kind of nationalism that the more generous and enlightened thinkers of an earlier period talked about.
You've also sort of looked at, as the book does, through nationalism through different decades and through the eyes of different leaders and through our freedom movement. How does that all come together in the way we view India today? Because they all had very different ideas also of what their idea of India was, in a sense. How do you think that all came together, and what do we learn from that?
The first thing to learn is that they were respectful of differences of nuance and emphasis in their views about nationalism. Even Rabindranath Tagore was initially criticized by his compatriots, even in Bengal, like Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das or Bipin Chandra Pal. But then they imbibed the Tagorean critique, and they themselves suggested that Indian anti-colonial nationalism should not be like the belligerent nationalisms of France or Germany. They accepted Tagore's view that humanity must be put at a higher plane. Similarly, of course, there were differences of opinion between a Mahatma Gandhi or a Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose or a Jawaharlal Nehru on the strategies to be pursued in the quest for independence, but they were respectful of one another. And I think, looking back now from the perspective of 2017, some of those differences are perfectly reconcilable. The bigger contradiction is between the broad-minded sense of nationhood espoused by this galaxy of anti-colonial leaders and the ideologues who are worshipped by those who are in power today, who wanted to see the untrammeled dominance of one community, the imposition of one language, instead of accepting differences, respecting differences, rising above them to create an overarching sense of Indian unity.
Well, I think this book is certainly a must-read for all of us who are trying to understand what kind of an India we're headed to and what kind of an India we've become today. Professor Bose, thank you so much for joining us. And like you've mentioned in the book repeatedly, it was Tagore, the man who wrote the national anthem, who cautioned the most about this this whole concept of nationalism and the worship of one's country. I think that was something that he had repeatedly emphasized on as being, in his own words, a menace.